The first thing I would say is that it is a mistake to want to be like anyone else.
Luther Vandross had a voice that could make anyone feel like they were falling in love. His songs were smooth, emotional, and deeply personal, like he was singing from experience. But behind that velvet voice and polished image was a man who, despite all his success, lived with a truth he never fully shared. He sang about heartbreak, longing, and deep love, yet he once admitted that he had never truly been in love, like the part many fans didn't know. For years, Luther quietly battled loneliness and kept a major part of himself hidden, not because he wanted to, but because he felt like he had to. Even as he rose to fame, winning Grammys and performing on the biggest stages, Luther kept his private life locked away. He was a global icon, but when it came to his own happiness, he made sacrifices few ever realized. So what was it that Luther Vandross felt he couldn't say out loud? To really understand that, we've got to go back to the beginning, before the fame, before the heartbreak, before the silence. Let's take it all the way back to where it started.
I think the most important thing about anyone's career is that you recognize who they are the instant you hear them. You know Aretha Franklin the minute you hear her. You know me the minute you hear me start singing. To want a career based on sounding like me or sounding like Aretha Franklin is a fallacy. You shouldn't want that.
Luther Vandross was born in 1951 in New York City. He was the youngest of 4 kids, and from the start, his family played a huge role in shaping who he'd become. Everyone called him Ronnie when he was little, a nickname that stuck after a commercial for Ronzoni pasta. It might sound silly, but for Luther, it was a warm reminder of his early home life, where laughter and love were always present, but life wasn't easy. When Luther was just 8 years old, his father, Luther Sr., passed away from complications related to diabetes. That loss left a scar. Luther was extremely close to his dad, and losing him so young shook his world. Decades later, he'd write Dance with My Father, one of his most powerful songs, a tribute that gave the world a glimpse into that deep, personal pain. It was Luther's way of honoring the man who had meant so much to him and expressing the grief he had quietly carried for years after his father's death. The family moved to the Bronx when Luther was around 9. It was a major shift, but the Bronx exposed him to a world of sound that would fuel his passion. His mother, Mary Ida, was a firm believer in education and discipline, but she also recognized Luther's talent and supported it. Music filled their home. Aretha Franklin, Dionne Warwick, Patti LaBelle. These weren't just names to Luther, they were voices that would later become part of his life in real ways. By his teenage years, Luther was already chasing music seriously. He sang in local groups, performed at the Apollo Theater, and even made early appearances on shows like Sesame Street. He had a natural gift, but he wasn't looking for overnight fame. Instead, he worked behind the scenes, quietly building a name for himself. In the 70s, he started doing backup vocals and arrangements for big names. He started doing impressions of bigger names. David Bowie tapped Luther to help with his Young Americans album. That's Luther singing on Fascination and helping shape the background vocals of that era. At the same time, he worked with artists like Roberta Flack, Chaka Khan, and Bette Midler. Industry folks noticed that Luther brought something special to every session: soul, precision, and emotion. But as good as he was in the background, it was clear that he wasn't meant to stay there. Then came 1981. Luther dropped his debut solo album, Never Too Much, and everything changed. The title track exploded, and suddenly the world knew who Luther Vandross was. He wasn't just a background singer anymore. His voice became the soundtrack for weddings, heartbreaks, and quiet nights in. The album went platinum. He was 30, and after years of grinding behind the scenes, he was finally front and center. Throughout the 80s and 90s, Luther became the king of love songs. He dropped hit after hit: Here and Now, A House Is Not a Home, If Only for One Night. His voice had a way of making people feel. He won 8 Grammys, sold out arenas, and worked with legends like Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey, and Janet Jackson. But while millions swooned over his lyrics about love and longing, few knew that Luther himself wasn't singing from personal experience. Despite all the romantic ballads, Luther once said he had never truly been in love, not the kind he sang about. That part of his life, his own desires, his personal truth, remained a mystery to the public.
Just realized we were talking about people back in the day who were, whether they were or not homosexual, bisexual, and so forth. But it came to my mind, I'm like, Luther Vandross.
Mm-hmm.
He
Another example.
was, again, assumed to be homosexual. I don't think it was ever admitted, but
That's not by him.
not
No.
by him.
Yeah.
But he never came out and said it.
I don't think
And I want to say and not to say assume, but I mean, you never saw him with a lady per se
so. Right.
around.
Right.
But again, even if he did come out and say it, he'd still be great.
Despite his success, Luther Vandross's private life was filled with layers of hidden struggles, especially regarding his. Throughout his career, rumors swirled about his personal life, particularly his orientation. But Luther never confirmed anything. He had always been a private person, and when asked about it, he would deflect or stay silent. There was a fear, a deep fear of what coming out might cost him, his reputation, his fans, and most of all, his family. Luther's mother, Mary Ida, was one of the most important people in his life, and Luther feared the pain his truth might cause her. He also worried about backlash from his fans, many of whom loved him not just for his voice, but for the romantic aura he projected through his music. He once made a famous joke to Vibe magazine saying, "I have houses in Beverly Hills and New York." On the surface, it sounded like a playful deflection, but there was an undeniable truth hidden in that statement. Luther was deflecting the question about his but the comment hinted at a life he felt he could never fully be open about. As time went on, Luther's closest friends began to speak more about his private struggles. Patti LaBelle, a longtime friend, revealed that Luther was gay but had been forced to remain silent about it for fear of the consequences. His closest circle knew the truth, but for Luther, the pressure to keep it all hidden weighed heavily on him. In interviews, Luther himself admitted that he had never truly been in love. While he had written some of the most iconic love songs that millions swore were written for them, Luther's personal life lacked the kind of love he sang about. His first real experience with heartbreak came when he was just 16. He fell for someone, but that person didn't return his feelings, leaving Luther devastated. That wound, according to his friends, never truly healed. And though he had relationships over the years, they were kept completely out of the public eye. They remained secret, unacknowledged by the world. But there was one tragedy that Luther could never have anticipated, one that would shake him to his core and change his life forever. In 1986, Luther was involved in a car accident that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The crash occurred while Luther was speeding, and he was accompanied by a young singer named Jimmy Salvamini. Tragically, the accident resulted in Jimmy's death, and multiple people were injured. The event left Luther emotionally shattered, and he was sued over the incident. While he eventually healed physically, the emotional scars never quite went away. Luther had always been known for his smooth voice and joyful demeanor, but this tragedy affected him in a way that fans never truly saw. He was devastated, and some say it marked the beginning of his emotional decline. This was a man who had already lived much of his life in silence, battling internal struggles that he couldn't share with the world. The weight of the crash only added to the toll he was already carrying, making it clear that fame, success, and wealth couldn't shield him from the deep emotional pain that lingered beneath the surface.
Are you in a good place now in your life?
Depends on when you ask me whether or not it's a good place.
Are you happy?
It depends. It also depends on when you ask. Asking right now, no, not particularly. No, it's too much work that yields too little result for my assessment of it all. And that's the state of mind that I'm in on this evening. Now, you could ask me that same question tomorrow morning and I may give you a different answer.
Luther Vandross faced health struggles throughout his life, and they played a major role in his final years. He had battled weight issues for most of his career, with his weight often fluctuating, but one of the most devastating battles he faced was with diabetes, a disease that ran in his family. The toll it took on him physically was evident, and it contributed to the series of health problems that would eventually shorten his life. In 2003, Luther's health took a turn for the worse when he suffered a massive stroke. The stroke left him unable to speak or walk, an unimaginable blow for someone whose voice had made him a household name. It was a cruel twist of fate. Luther, the man whose voice had enchanted millions, found himself silenced, unable to communicate as he once did. His recovery was slow, and while he continued to fight, his health deteriorated rapidly. Just 2 years later, in 2005, Luther Vandross passed away at the age of 54. His shocked the world, especially considering the legacy he had left behind. For a voice so legendary, for a man who had touched so many lives with his music, it seemed far too soon. The music world lost a true icon, but even in his passing, his story didn't end. The revelations that followed would change how people saw him forever. One of the most significant posthumous revelations came from Luther's close friend, Patti LaBelle. In an interview years after Luther's death, Patti confirmed that he was gay. While some people praised her for her honesty and for shedding light on a part of Luther's life that had been kept in the shadows, others, like media personality Wendy Williams, criticized her for outing him after his death. The public debate that followed sparked important conversations about LGBTQ+ visibility, especially within the Black community and in the world of music. For many, Patti's revelation about Luther was a bittersweet moment. It made people reflect on the silence that surrounded Luther's personal life while he was alive, but it also brought to the surface the deep-seated issues within the music industry and society at large when it came to LGBTQ+ rights and acceptance, particularly for Black artists. Luther's struggle to remain private about his wasn't just personal, it was a reflection of the broader societal pressures that often force people, especially Black public figures, to hide their true selves. But what do you guys think about Luther Vandross? Share your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next one.